Senator Perry, it's a privilege to be able to talk to the fourth annual Hill Country Water Summit. And it's a little awkward, obviously, talking to a camera when I was expecting to get to talk to you guys live. And I'm sorry that COVID hadn't allowed that to happen, but we're looking forward to the day sooner than later where one-on-one and face-to-face can happen. But again, I want to thank you guys for having me on and talk a little bit about what's coming up in the session specific to your area, hopefully, a little information. And secondly, where we're at with water and where I think we need to be with water and where we'll continue to push for water initiatives. And thirdly, a little bit of a broad-based kind of a perspective of where I think we'll be in the 87th legislature when we start back. It's really funny, every 10 years we kind of seem to look a lot alike. I entered the session in 2011. It's my first session as a House of Representative. We had a budget deficit estimated to be $27 billion. We were in a redistricting area, and just as important, we were in a severe drought or in the middle of a severe drought. So 2021, unfortunately, is shaping up to be a lot like a 2011 as far as environment goes. We're 98% of the state. It's currently in the form of some sort of drought as compared to 2% of the state just a year ago. So how quickly things can change. But the drought of 98% across the state should be alarming. And maybe it is a 10-year weather pattern that we find ourselves in, that just by virtue of the way jet streams and other things operate every 10 years, we need to look towards that as a possible drought period. But 90% of the drought across the state is where we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in a budget deficit coming up due to COVID issues, as well as redistricting session. So a perfect storm every 10 years, but maybe one that we should pay more attention to as far as predictability goes. We have about 19.8 million Texans in some form of drought. We have 22% of extreme and exceptional drought. So that just serves as a reminder of the importance of the statewide water plan, and where we find ourselves there is we truly do not meet the requirements 50 years out in that state water plan. As of today, it's about 400,000 estimated acre feet short and shy to meet the growing demands of the state. So that's something we'll continue to try to address through interim reporting and legislation as far as awareness goes, obviously. What does the session mean as far as COVID issues and future water supply conversations? We cannot put things of permanent nature and long-term planning on the shelf because we had an episode of something unpredictable such as COVID-19. COVID-19 has obviously had an impact on how we are going to do session, and how obviously has had an impact on our businesses and other industry groups, as well as people have lost their lives over it. So it's not something we can ignore, but what we can't do is make short-term decisions around short-term events, hopefully, that have long-term impacts. We have a water plan. We have a produced water legislation coming up that supplements or will satisfy some of the shortcomings, if successful, in that water plan. And those are all long-term things that we can't overlook during these short-term crises that we may face. So that'll be my goal, is to continue to push for those things we need to be doing for a long-term Texas, because we believe COVID-19 will be a short-term problem, and we will hopefully by spring of next year be seeing the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. As far as future water supply, that was one of the big interim charges that the Lieutenant Governor gave us. There's 34,000 disposal wells across the Permian Basin with an estimated 5 billion barrels of produced water injected for disposal in 2019. That was Railroad Commission numbers. Between 2009 and 2017, 33 million acre feet of excess produced water was created in the Delaware and Midland Basins. Bureau of Economic Geology gave us those statistics. Remembering that we are only 400,000 acre feet deficit in the statewide water plan, it is just unconscionable to continue to waste or miss an opportunity to capture part of that produced water and supplement our state water plans where it makes sense. So interim charge report will discuss those water strategies and what we need to do go forward as far as bringing some of the technologies as well as the user groups as well as the current producer groups of those produced waters technologies together in a room and see what scalability, distribution, capturing, and cleanup looks like, and put that conversation to bed for once for all. A lot of times that starts with the conversation that it costs too much, and truthfully there's not been an economic study that supports that assumption. So we will hopefully have the resources available and groups available coming out of the session to address whether or not produced water in the Permian Basin specifically can be a viable supply source for the state in that area. The produced water will the legislation will produce a consortium to achieve that goal, combining researchers, industry leaders, producers, and any and all stakeholders that produced water conversation will be relevant to. Specific to the Guadalupe Basin Coalition, which we all remember the Lake Dunlap incident that came in, I believe, right at the end of the session, last session. No fault to those guys. There was just a lot of unknowns and a lot of assumptions and a lot of questions as to who the jurisdiction of the maintenance of that dam relied on. Was it a state asset? Was it a private asset? Was it a local asset? Was it a federal asset? Lots of unknown questions, and as we delved into that, we recognized a void on some of these dams across the state as to who owns them, who maintains them, who's responsible for paying for that maintenance, and what the status or what the condition of the dam may be. So, as part of the interim charge, we are asking for an inventory of those dams and all dams pretty much across the state, as who the maintenance and operations of them are and what their responsibilities are for that, what the funding sources to maintain those dams at a safe level would be, and hopefully be able to deliver that to the legislature going forward. That will be able to at least give us an idea of where we're possibly exposed to property and life damage if one of those breached, and who's responsible for funding. In the GBRA case, we found that the statute that enabled them was a little bit confusing into could they fund a maintenance and operation budget or not. And to their credit, as well as the local stakeholders around Lake Dunlap and McQueen in those areas, they all came together and we figured it out and gave them the necessary direction. And Texas Water Development Board has helped and stepped up in a big way to do that, but they are now moving down the right track and probably will serve as a model for private-owned dams around the state. Very proud of that. Session in general, it is the goal. I believe it's nothing set in stone today, but specifically over in the Senate, Republican side for sure, we have emphasized the desire to have public testimony in the Capitol in a public fashion. Invited and resource witnesses will probably be allowed to do virtual because they already are allowed to do that. We believe it's critical that public testimony can occur in person and has to have it in order for the process to work. So you will see some form, I believe, of public testimony allowed, as well as the general public, but it will be based on probably several factors. One, everybody entering the Capitol will be tested that day. It will be the 15-minute test, we're pretty certain. So you'll be tested to come into the Capitol. There'll be a process in which you go about doing that. Probably have to register online for the bill if you're going to be testifying on those bills, which gives Texas Department of Emergency Management some planning opportunities for staffing and number of tests that need to be made available if you show up. So our goal is to have it. You will see a pretty slow session on the first 60 days is typical, but even more so because trying to minimize the unnecessary population or people inside the Capitol walls just to prevent the spread of COVID until vaccines are more prevalent and until we know a little more about the virus. But the goal is to allow public interaction with the members and with the legislature as needed, but not to exasperate it with unnecessary interactions with the public. So if you don't have a purpose of being there, you probably shouldn't be there. If you have a bill that you need to testify on, there'll be a process. I believe it is the desire so far in the conversations we've been having to let you do that. Probably the big 3 or 4 items of the legislature, you're going to see, obviously, budget. Budget's going to have a deficit. I came into the session in 2011. It was a deficit of real dollars with no cash from the feds coming, and any cash that had came from the feds been spent in 2009. It was a very hard budget. 2021, we're going in with a whole lot more tools in the toolbox. We believe that some of the COVID dollars that the state is sitting on for legitimate purposes will be given some flexibility to help manage some of the deficit that we're having. We anticipate some Medicaid relief, as we typically do every January, getting matched that the feds calculate, and that will be of some number. We've had some cuts from the state budget agencies that will flow into that. So our deficit's about $6 billion, probably give or take $1 billion. And that is very manageable coming out of this current year budget. Going into 21 to 23 budget, that is up for grabs as to the momentum the session takes on with respect to oil and gas production, economy, how we respond to COVID, vaccines, and all of those are in play. But that will be a obviously smaller budget, but one I still believe is very manageable with cash balances that we have, with the rainy day funds and commitments to public ed and some of the things. I think we'll still be able to get there. So, won't be a fun budget for sure. I've been through the 11, like I say, and that was as hard as it comes. And I just feel better about where we're sitting today from budget going into it. Redistricting, a lot of that's out of our control until we receive census data. We have got mixed messages on when that may be. If it comes in post May 31st, there's some conversations constitutional on when we can meet or how we would meet. But we need to get that census data by no later than March to be able to do some of the work that needs to be done on that. If not, then it possibly goes to a 5-member board after May 31st. So a lot of unknowns on that, out of our control with respect to redistricting. One of the other big items, and I think it would be very applicable to your groups, is rural broadband. If there's a silver lining in COVID, it is that when urban suffers a little bit on something, then rurals typically benefit from it, and broadband is no exception. We recognize that there are legitimate holes in the network of broadband access across the state, specifically in particular to rural Texas, and I believe that the feds are going to have money available, and I think the legislature is going to make that a top priority to come out of the session with a plan on how do we get affordable, dependable, and quality broadband to every zip code in the state, and I'm hoping to be a major part of that. Something we started last session with a bill that I filed with Representative Price or Chairman Price out of Amarillo. We got that report back on, I believe it was December 1st. Gives a little bit of a roadmap where we go, but it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of partnering with particular providers of broadband to come together and solve a big problem for the state. But I think there's momentum and interest and actually funding to address that if we do it right and get it right coming out of the legislature. So with that, I'm not going to keep you a whole lot longer. I appreciate the opportunity to get to bring you up to speed a little bit. Hopefully it was informative. Please don't hesitate to give Catherine a call in my water office if you need something, and look forward hopefully to getting to see you in the session. Again, the session's going to be a 60-day stall as far as things that don't have to get done. We'll see redistricting and finance committees working the first 2 months as we typically would on finance for sure, but redistricting's got some deadlines as far as public testimony and things that's got to get done, so we'll be doing a lot of that, probably virtually on that level, because it's mainly for information purposes. But just going to be a different session, but everybody's patience has been tested, and I think everybody's moved forward and understands this is where we're living. With that, thank you all for what you do. Thank you for letting me speak to you. And again, don't hesitate to give Catherine a call in the Austin office if you've got questions on anything I've said or would like a follow-up. I'll be glad to try to connect with you if I can do that. So have a good weekend or a good day.